I was born in the Middle East. I won't mention the country, but the following story is all true. When growing up, I remember my name being called as if from far away, and every time this happened, naturally, I'd stop and listen. The voice was sometimes that of a man, and sometimes a woman. This obviously did not happen all the time, and I learned to just ignore it and get on with what I was doing. The Middle East is considered the cradle of civilization, based on the Abrahamic religions. That's where everything started, and so did the history of the jinn. I have heard many stories that took place within our own circle of friends, not too long before I was born. These stories were discussed among adults in a matter-of-fact fashion, as real incidents that have taken place, and in some cases, were still happening. Dark arts, books, written in Aramaic language, are circling among certain ancient group of people who are indeed using them to control demons to do their bidding. I remember hearing adults talking about one of their friends who needed some help around the house. The friend decided to trap a female jinn and make her do all the household chores for her. Since everyone had seen this captive jinn, they also learned that even though the jinn wasn't able to free herself, she was able to disobey her human master and do the exact opposite of what she had asked to do. One day, I was playing with my sisters when I heard my name being called again. I stopped and asked my sisters if they could hear what I'm hearing. They both said no and asked what I was hearing. I told them that somebody is calling my name, but it sounds like it's from far away. While they could not hear the person calling my name, they both admitted that they too hear somebody calling my name from time to time. So, we decided to ask our friends, parents, and grandparents to see if they have experienced this strange phenomenon. To our astonishment, everyone said they also hear someone call their name occasionally, even though no one else does. During a gathering one day, we decided to go around the room and ask everybody if they've had this experience. As we're making our rounds, an elderly man who was an uncle of a relative had overheard our conversation and told us to pray every time this happens. We asked him why, and he said, "You don't want to know who is calling you, but trust me, just pray when this happens." Years passed, and I ran into this old man again at a different gathering. This time, I was determined to find out what he meant by telling us to pray. As I walked up to him to say hello, I reminded him again of what the conversation was about and the advice he had given me when I was a kid. This time, without any hesitation, and he responded, "My dear, the summoning demons are calling you. They are ceaselessly looking for the one person who will answer when they call." I had goosebumps, just listening to what he had to say. So I asked him, "What happens if somebody answers?" And he responded, "If you answer the summoning demons, you will be possessed by the one calling you, and the worst part is that nobody will ever know." My family and I eventually moved to live in the US, and since then, I haven't heard my name being called again. I believe these demons originate in the Middle East, or perhaps only the country I was born in. They might be the infamous jinn of the Middle East. Either way, I'm glad that I am far, far away from the summoning demons. I remember quite well when I was about 6 years old. I was in first grade. It was just a normal sunny day here in Florida. This particular day, though, will always haunt me, because it happened so unusually. I was finishing halfway through the day at my elementary school. My older brother, who was in 5th grade, tossed me the key to our house. He had guitar practice after school, and my mother was supposed to be home, just in case I had a key. The day was over and I was going home, got off the bus, and I headed to the door. I did not see my mother's car, but maybe it was in the garage. I tried knocking. No answer. I had begun to get worried, knocking harder and harder. Still nothing. I had forgotten that I had the key in my lunchbox, but I was just so overwhelmed with anxiety, thinking something bad has happened. That's when I got this icky feeling. All of a sudden, the door opened. I thought it was just a prank and that somebody just opened it and ran and hid. I stepped inside, and this icky feeling grew worse. I checked behind the door and the rest of the house very eerily. The last part I checked, the kitchen, and I'll never forget the feeling I got when I saw a Ouija board with its planchet taped directly on the board. I was terrified. I realized then who opened my front door. I dropped all my stuff and ran to my neighbor's house, 3 streets over. I couldn't stand to be alone in that house. After that, it was never the same. Doors would open and shut. TVs would turn on and turn off. They would even turn static, early hours in the morning. No one in my family quite believes my story, but the door was an extremely heavy wooden door that no way a 50-pound 6-year-old could bust it down herself. Most parts of Florida are ancient Indian burial grounds and swampy areas that are ideal for dead bodies. You never know who you could invite into your home. This is a short story, but I still feel the need to get this out there. My friend is out of town, so I'm taking care of her puppies. I was driving her to her house yesterday when something odd happened. I went the back way, which I almost never take going to her house, only coming from it. It's a long, winding road with almost nothing but trees, a few houses here and there, and a very old cemetery. Now, usually, when I drive through or pass by a cemetery, I mute my music. It just feels disrespectful not to. Since I don't usually take this road in this direction, I did not realize I was already passing the cemetery. Suddenly, I was hit with this incredible feeling of absolute dread, almost as if you could sense something terrible was about to happen. Like when somebody tells you, "We need to talk," and you just know it's something bad. Only this feeling overwhelmed me. I felt it deep in my chest. Just pure despair. I muted my music and was actually about to pull over on the side of the road to calm down, when suddenly the feeling had gone away. Just as soon as it had come, it went. I felt perfectly fine, besides a little confused. Not sure what else to do, I kept driving, with my music still muted. As I drove, I saw a family gathered for a burial right on the edge of the cemetery. After I took care of my friend's dogs, I drove past the cemetery again, my music muted, of course. I did not get any strange feelings this time. I haven't had a strange feeling passing by this cemetery before, after all. Later, at work, I told a couple of my coworkers what had happened. One of them joked that it might have been the spirit telling me to mute my music, as to not disturb the mourning family at the burial. I laughed her off, but in all honesty, I can't help but wonder if she was right. I have to drive past that cemetery again today, and any time I visit my friend, I will always make sure to have my music muted. About 20 years ago, my parents bought some land in an underdeveloped town just south of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. On this land, they built a large 2-story home for them and their 4 children. Flash forward to today, and it is only my parents, myself, and my brother living in this home, as my older sisters are married and live with their own families. Although everyone in my family has experienced things in this house, the story I am sharing with you today began several months back. I was brushing my teeth in the downstairs bathroom when I heard my mother speak to me through the crack in her bedroom door. This was a bit surprising to me because the light in her room was off. But I figured she was trying to take a nap due to her voice sounding so slightly tired and slightly off. It sounded as though she had her face pressed against the slightly cracked door, but it also did not sound like her. She asks me a question about my sister, and I responded before bounding down the hall and up the stairs to my bedroom. As I got to my door, I heard some noise from the other side of the upstairs portion of our home. I walked towards it, and I saw my mom sitting at the desk space we have up there. I asked her if she had just been in her room, and asked me questions regarding my sister. She gently denies it, saying she has been up there for hours doing work. We brushed it off as nothing, and just went about our day. A few months later, I was awakened just between 3 and 4 in the morning by my mom shouting my name from the base of the stairs. She shouted my name twice, demanding I come down the stairs. So I get out of my bed, walked down the stairs, but did not see her. I walk into the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, her office, the bathroom. I found nothing. All of the lights were off, and I was the only one awake. I went back to bed, and when I woke up a few hours later, I asked why she had waken me up and what she wanted at that odd hour in the morning. She oddly denied being up and having ever shouted my name. We thought this to be weird, but again, shuffled it in the back of our minds. So, a few weeks later, this happens again, and I was again woken up by my mother calling my name at the odd hours in the morning. This time, I sat up in bed and listened to it before deciding to stay in my bed, knowing it was not my mom. My boyfriend told me it was probably a dream or sleep paralysis. I figured he was probably right. That is, until this past weekend. On Saturday morning, my mother told me I had woken her up calling her name from the kitchen. She walks through the kitchen and living room, trying to find me, but alas, I was sound asleep. Saturday night, my boyfriend and I fell asleep on the couch, watching movies with my parents, and between 3 and 4 a.m., he told me that he had heard me talking to him. He knew it wasn't me, though, because the sounds were coming from me, and it sounded sinister. He told me that he had a weird feeling about it, and prayed until I woke up. I asked him more about it, but he brushed it off as some sleep paralysis. He does have an extensive history of sleep paralysis, and has experienced a lot of weird paranormal things, all of which he hates to talk about. He chalks this up to being nothing, does not want to talk about it, period. I just wonder if this is something I should worry about. My family, my boyfriend, and I are all Catholic. Our house has been blessed and is full of blessed crucifixes above every doorway. We do not want to give attention to anything. This is not the first experience I have had in this house, or the worst, or, I suppose, the last. I'm not sure that this is even all that scary, or paranormal for that matter, but basically everything else on here sounds more real, or more paranormal for that matter. Here, I will have 2 different stories for you. One of them about black shadows running in front of me, or waving next to me behind the shed that we had. The second being a woman sleeping next to my cousin. These happened when I was around 12 or 13 years old, the same year for both. The stories are numbered 1 and 2. Number 1. So, this could really be anything. Sometimes when you blink, you see black dots around, or you see things after you have your eyes closed for a few minutes. Maybe it's just me. When I was walking back over the rocks from the swimming area, I saw a black shadow running in front of me, around the size of a 5-foot person. At the time, I thought it was nothing, or it was maybe just my imagination. Then, later that next day, I was sitting in the porch area of our cottage, and I see the same looking black shadow standing behind a shed, waving at me to come over to it, or waving hi to me. As I said above, this could be anything, so take it with a grain of salt. Number 2. This happened a few days or so later, and I randomly woke up in the middle of the night. What time, you ask? I had no clue, as the cottage has no power or anything of that sort. And plus, I did not have a cell phone at the time. I stood up from my bed and looked over to where my cousin was sleeping. As I look over, I saw a woman sleeping next to my cousin, an elderly lady to be exact, that looked like my cousin's grandmother. She had dead gray skin, dark red lipstick, and a smile on her face. She was wearing what most elders would wear before they went off to bed, but it was in a darker gray color. Her eyes were closed like she was sleeping. I laid back down and tried to fall asleep as fast as I could. The next morning, I asked my cousin's grandma if she was sleeping next to him at all that night. She looked at me and said no. Most of the people were laughing at what I said, and I just said that I saw somebody sleeping next to my cousin that looked exactly like her. I mean, nothing much else came out of that, and I still have no clue what it was that I saw. I just thought that it could have been me seeing things from the dream that I was having. Or maybe it could have just been that dark that I have thought I saw something in the dark. The second one is a little more weird to me, and I sometimes wonder if that's what I saw. It could have been something from the dream that I was having, or just me seeing faces in the dark. If anybody thinks they know what it is, let me know. I went to a college in a small town in Michigan, and one summer, about 7 years ago, I had to stay there to take summer classes. At that time, I lived in a house with 6 other people, built back in the 1800s. It was a huge house with about a total of 10 rooms, but no one else stayed back there that summer, so I was in that house all alone for 3 months. Anyway, I was bartending at the time, along with taking classes, and one night, I came home right around 1 in the morning, went up the stairs to my room. I lived on a floor with 3 other people, and a light coming from one of my roommates' rooms caught my attention. Everybody had been gone for 2 months or so, and her door was padlocked, shut from the outside, so I didn't understand why her light was on. I quickly texted her to ask if I could unscrew the padlock so I could check on it. She said that it was fine, and also reiterated to me that she had not been in there for 2 months or so. Once I opened the door, I shuddered. The light was on, and it was a light switch on the wall that had to be flipped manually to be turned on. I would have noticed this sooner if this light had been on for 2 months straight. So, how was this light on suddenly? Well, I had a friend stay with me that night, but I was still pretty unnerved. A few days later, I was cleaning the whole 4-story house and was trying to really gut it of garbage before everybody came back in the fall. This house, by the way, was always rented to college students and had built up a lot of garbage that was just never really thrown away. I had about 4 to 5 huge garbage bags sitting by the front door, getting ready to be taken out to the garbage the next day, which meant the bags would sit there for about a week. I got used to this sound that the huge, thick door that must have been there since the house was built would make when it hit the bag closest to the door. Such a unique clinking sound. I was up in my room one day and had been thinking about that darn light that was turned on all of a sudden. Now, I distinctly heard that sound of the door hitting the bag. I tweaked. I called a few of my friends to help me check the whole house for maybe an intruder. They come over, and absolutely nobody else was in the house. At this point, I knew in my soul what was going on, but obviously, until you experience something paranormal yourself, it's hard to explain it to people without them trying to rationalize it. At this point, I had gone home to my parents for a little bit to visit before school started up again in the fall. I was telling my mother some of these things, and she stops me with this look of shock on her face and says, "Oh, Sam, I have something to tell you." Well, her friend is a medium and does do readings on her side, but her and my mom were just out to lunch one day, and randomly, this medium says to my mom, "Your daughter, Sam, she goes to school in this town and lives in this address, right?" And my mom was like, "Yeah, why?" She tells my mom that there are 4 spirits that live there, 2 elderly people and 2 younger ones. The younger ones like to play tricks on students that live there, while the elderly ones try to keep them from scaring the people that live there. They feel bad for scaring Sam while she lived there alone for the summer, like the time they left the light on for her. But they won't do that stuff anymore, as they just basically want to coexist with her. This medium had also made sure to mention that these spirits are not bad, and there's no need to be afraid of them. Being that this happened 7 years ago, I thought of it a few months ago when I was back with my family for Christmas and made my mom repeat the entire story to me, so I knew I did not make any of this up. She reiterated the story almost exactly the way I remembered it. I'm 23, and I'm currently living alone. Sleep paralysis and night terrors are so common for me, to the point that I can recognize them instantly and break free from them on my own. But a few nights ago, I experienced something very different. A few nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night. I reached for my phone and saw that it was roughly 4 a.m. I'm a light sleeper, so waking up randomly like this has always been annoying, yet a common occurrence. I sighed. My alarm will go off in 2 hours. I should really try to fall back asleep, I thought. I kept telling myself to stop trying so hard. Let the sleep come to you. I even attempted meditation. But the more I did, the more I began to feel my brain inevitably waking up, uncontrollably racing through all the tasks that I needed to get done the next day. I accepted this fact and decided I should at least rest my eyes. I curled up on my side, on one half of my queen-sized bed, facing the edge of the bed. All of a sudden, clear as day, I feel my mattress sink behind me, and somebody sitting down. My eyes shot open, and I froze, confused and terrified. I felt that sinking spot in the mattress shift and heard the sheets shuffle, as if the person was dragging themselves across my bed, behind me. I lied very still and shut my eyes tight, trying to regulate my breathing and heartbeat. I told myself, as long as I can convince them I am really asleep, they'd leave me alone. I felt the person, or whatever it was, moving closer and closer to me until they touched my back. I did everything to hold in a gasp. I didn't dare open my eyes because I feared what I'd come face to face with. I could almost picture a haunting face leaning over mine, and I did not want to witness that. As if they made sure I was really asleep, they retrieved. I then let out a sigh of relief, disguised as one of those grunts you make when you're sleeping. I could still feel them sitting on my bed behind me. I slowly opened my eyes, but I didn't move another muscle. Trying not to move my head and neck, I looked around the room with my very limited field of vision. It's not real, I thought. I was just dreaming. I was sure because I knew if it was an actual intruder, I would not have reacted the way I did, and I wouldn't have tried to pretend to be asleep. I would most likely put up a fight, try to escape or scream for help. But why is that spot on my bed behind me still sunken in? I looked at the room again, and from what I could see, my room looked exactly the way it should. You know how when you recall a dream that you had, which took place in your room would always look like a bit off in your dreams. Well, I was very sure I was looking at my room with my own eyes, so it had to be real. It wasn't a dream. Then what was... All of a sudden, I felt a light tug. I flinched, gasped, and closed my eyes. But it was too late. The person began pulling my clothes violently once they realized I was now awake. I screamed and kicked and cried as I mustered up all the strength within myself to keep everything from going crazy. The entire time, I didn't dare turn around to see who it was or what it was. I pulled and kicked, wailing in the same curled position, keeping my eyes shut, snot and tears covering my face. For some reason, I believed if I let the thing pull and expose myself, I'd be a goner. Then, as suddenly as it all occurred, it all stopped. I opened my eyes again and saw that the sky was now brightening up. I sat up and looked at my bed and around my room. I was fully covered by my clothes, and there was no sign of a tug-of-war ever taking place. There was no snot or tears. I was sweating and my heart was beating out of my chest. What was that? I was beyond baffled. Usually, when I see my room in my dream, I'll remember how off it looked once I've waken up. But this time, nothing about the room I just saw seconds ago looked off to me. I was sure I was looking at my room with my own eyes, and the mattress sinking, it all felt so real. Perhaps my eyes were really open and looking at my room in reality, but my exhausted brain somehow slipped into that realm between dreamland and consciousness and created this juxtaposition of reality and imagination and terror. But I am open to other explanations. I have always been bothered by this one experience, and to this day, still have dreams about it. I'm now 38, but this story begins back when I was only 21. Back in 2003, I was living with two roommates in an apartment in Minnesota. They were friends of mine from high school. Our life was usually pretty boring. Just three guys, hanging around, playing video games, that kind of thing. One day, I came home after working a long shift at the grocery store that I was employed by my roommate, and, of course, he had a Ouija board set up on the living room floor with their respective girlfriends. They excitedly informed me that they had contacted a spirit. They were asking it all sorts of dumb questions, like, what kind of car do I drive? Does my boyfriend love me? Just really mundane stuff. A non-believer, I jokingly remarked that the spirit was probably angry with their questions, and the board said yes. I felt it was my friends messing with me, so I decided to run a little test. I sat down with the group and asked its name. The spirit said its name was Mike. I asked it to prove it was a real spirit, and not my friends just dinking around, by telling me something only I would know. The spirit, Mike, responded by spelling out Sue, S-U-E, which is a sister I had not and still not met, and never told my friends about. While this was indeed odd, I was still not convinced. Next, I asked the spirit who I would marry. The board spelt out Kelly Anderson. I didn't know anyone by that name, so I laughed it off and said I did not believe Mike was real. One of my roommates, though, then mentioned that he had read somewhere that if a spirit counts backwards from 10 to 0, they can escape the board. The planchet began to spell out 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, which freaked out the girls, and they threw the planchet across the room and put away the board. I didn't think anything of it and went to bed. About a month later, I was trying to fall asleep one night, but couldn't, because I felt like something was watching me. I swore I saw a shadow creep along the wall behind my TV that was kind of humanoid-shaped, but I just wrote it off as a trick of the mind due to being tired. Finally, I managed to doze off a bit later and woke up to a feeling of being dragged off the edge of my bed. When I regained my sense, I was right on the edge of my bed, about to fall onto the floor. Still in denial, I thought maybe I had just slept funny. Now, fast forward to 2007. I'm still working at the same grocery store, and I meet a woman named Kelly who had just recently gotten a job there. I did not think anything of it because her surname was not Anderson. I got to know this woman, and we began dating a few months later. In 2009, we got engaged. One night, I was sitting with her in the living room of our apartment, and I was thinking back about the Ouija board incident from 6 years earlier. I told her the story of Mike and how the spirit informed me I was going to marry a Kelly Anderson, but I scoffed because her last name was different. She got really quiet and kind of just stared at me. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that at one time she was thinking of asking her stepfather, who I had not met yet at the time, to adopt her. If she had done this, her last name would have been Anderson. It freaked me out a bit. In 2010, we got married, moved into a small house in Wisconsin. Strange things started happening around our new home immediately. I would hear whispers in the night as I tried to sleep. Kelly never heard anything. Sometimes I would wake up and see the shadows of little creatures moving out alongside our bedroom door. Eventually, I began to wake up to a feeling of something sitting on my chest. I would be unable to move, and I would see this horrible being staring down at me as it pinned me. It was wispy and malevolent looking. I would eventually regain my ability to move again and fight it off. Then, it would disappear. I know this sounds like sleep paralysis, but under the circumstances, I don't believe it was something that simple. Not to mention, this continued to happen all the way to 2012, when my son was born. For 2 years, I fought off this entity that would come multiple times a week. To try and what? Possess me? Kill me? I have no idea. I was constantly tired and worn out. Throw a newborn into the equation, and I was utterly exhausted. The attacks continued until my son turned 3 months old. Then, one night, I heard a strange voice saying something in an unfamiliar language on my baby monitor. I ran into my son's room, but nobody was there. Not a thing. After that night, the attacks on me continued, but became less and less frequent. Eventually, it would maybe happen a couple of times a month. Unfortunately, in 2014, things did not work out with Kelly, and we got a divorce. She moved back to Minnesota, and I began seeing a new woman a few months after our divorce was finalized. The second Kelly moved out, the attacks stopped. I got remarried in 2016. I have been attack-free for 6 years now, but I still think about Mike and the Ouija board. Was this a spirit that was always attached to my ex? Did it attach to me because of the Ouija board, and now has attached itself to my son? I ask him if he's ever experienced anything unexplained, but I've never gotten a direct answer. I fear I never will have an answer. I am a 20-year-old girl, and throughout my whole life, I feel like I've been pretty in tune with the paranormal. Admittedly, I have become slightly obsessed, not in the summoning demons way, but more of too much research and spending my free time and all day at work listening to podcasts. I have many stories to tell, but I figured I'd start with one that has been weighing on me for a while. I moved into a new place in December of 2017 with my roommate. We will call her Nikki. When we moved in, I felt a huge weight off my shoulders because for the first time ever, I didn't feel any presence in my home. Skip forward to about May, and things had been going pretty well when we found out that a family friend who was 16, we'll call her Morgan, didn't have a place to live. So, she was invited to stay with us. I had known this kid for roughly 15 years and known she came from a really messed up family. She told us her dad was a Satanist and had cast a curse on her, and now she was being followed by what she described as a shadow creature. With my past to the paranormal, I believed her but thought nothing of it. A few weeks had passed and the little inconveniences had been happening, such as our coffee table being moved or mail being scattered across the floor. We have cats, so I didn't think much of it, but it was pretty annoying. This kept happening and then gradually started getting weirder and weirder, like our entire bottle of laundry detergent being poured out under the dining room table and the empty bottle being set in the middle of the puddle. At around the same time, both Morgan and Nikki started having issues with sleep paralysis. Nikki used to get it all the time when she was a kid, but hadn't in years. The strange thing was, even though they were separate experiences, both girls claimed to have seen the same thing. A child-sized black figure. The body was small, but the head was way too big, and the hands were very long, but they couldn't see any other features, just a black outline. Luckily, I didn't have sleep paralysis, and I never have in my life, so I mistakenly thought that it was safe. One night, I was home alone and was in a deep depressing mood. Everything in the house felt so heavy, I decided to take a nap on the couch. When I woke up, I couldn't breathe. It felt like somebody was pushing on my chest, so I sat up and the pressure was gone. It was then that I noticed the room was dark, like unnaturally dark. My TV was on, and the hall light was on, so there's no reason my little portion of the living room would be so dark. I decided to not think about it and turned the TV up, then started scrolling through my phone. A moment later, I felt a heavy footfall come out of the kitchen, directly up behind me. It sounded like a full-grown man. I thought someone had come into the house while I was asleep, because we always left the sliding glass door in the kitchen unlocked. Too afraid to turn around and look, I took out my phone and went on my Snapchat. I turned on the flash, and when I switched it to the front-facing camera, my screen went completely black, and my flash wouldn't work. So I drew the courage to turn around. I saw nothing, and instantly, the room was light again. I grabbed my keys and got the hell out of there until my roommate was off work. A couple of days had passed and my roommate and I burned sage, oiled all the entrances and told whatever was in the house that it was not welcome and it had to leave. I thought that was the end of it. We didn't have any more things moved. Morgan had moved in with her brother and the house seemed lighter, except Nikki was still experiencing sleep paralysis almost every night. Skip forward a couple weeks, and I was laying in bed with my two cats. It was about 3 a.m, and I heard pots and pans being moved in the kitchen. My cats woke up and were growling, so I grabbed my gun and checked every corner of the house. Nikki was still sleeping, so I went back to my room thinking it could have been her, and her cats since they like to hide in the cupboards. The second I shut the door, there were 3 loud bangs on it that made me jump so high, I fell back onto my bed. I yelled for the thing to go away. I didn't want it here, and it had to leave. What felt like minutes later, I opened the door and my older cat ran out and turned into the kitchen and screamed like she was hurt. I looked for her for an hour and could not find her. I went to bed crying. The next morning, I woke up and my cat was asleep to me, unharmed, and I went to wake up my roommate and told her about the night before. She explained that she had been awake when I got up and had also heard 3 bangs but was too afraid to get out of bed. We oiled again and brought in her mother who worked at the church, and she blessed the house. Not too long after Morgan's little brother moved in with me, and we didn't have anything happen after that. It makes me wonder if Morgan's dad really did curse her. He used to always tell his 3 daughters that they were mistakes, and he only intended to have his 2 sons. That would explain why after she moved in with his older brother, it didn't bother her anymore, and why when the younger brother came to stay with me, the problem went away. All I know is that whatever it was so negative. My depression had never been worse, and we were always arguing in that house. I'm just glad it's finally over. I'm a 29-year-old female, and as recently as September of 2019, I purchased a house. It's an older home, built in the 1800s. It's sturdy and has plenty of rooms, 2 bedrooms upstairs and down. My room, the largest of them all, has a walk-in closet the size of a small child's bedroom, a crawl-space attic above that, and finally, at the back of the closet is a door to an unfinished, unused type of walk-in attic space. I wanted to turn it into a small reading nook in the future, but now my unease towards that area is becoming unresolvable. I almost never use my closet. I've noticed small things here and there that hint at the paranormal. Despite my sensitivity to the realm, I try to explain happenings rationally before outright jumping to a demon in my house. Such things include shadows without a source, voices from my closet, items missing or moved, cold spots, bangs on the walls, doors being closed that I'd left open, etc. Typical spooky stuff. A lot of these things can be explained by me being forgetful, or the fact that the house is almost 200 years old. However, no touching until this morning. I'm a bartender, and my night ends at around 4 a.m. By the time I'm finished at work, get home, get ready, and into bed. I was laying in bed, sleep mask on, stories queued up and ready to sleep to. I turned out my light and settled in. I was still wide awake and just getting comfortable. I'm a left side sleeper, and I'm stretched into my favorite position. Legs stacked, right foot behind left, with the left inside of my foot touching the mattress. Imagine a very loose fetal position. So I'm comfortable, and suddenly, I feel the sensation of a finger press gently into the inside of my right foot, the one against the mattress, and travel from my arch to my heel and sink away. I tried not to panic. I kept my breathing steady, and I thought through every rational explanation I can come up with and rolled over. Similar position, opposite side. It didn't happen again, and I willed myself to sleep. As I mentioned before, I have seen and heard hints towards the paranormal, but only recently have things escalated. This touch wasn't the first occurrence of it letting me know. It is, however, the first that I can't justify with a rational answer. The first time was before the light in the hall had been installed, so there was no light to go by. I just had left my bathroom and stepped onto the landing of the stairs when I heard the shower door rattle and slide partially. My cat was steadily beside me, bouncing and chirping, because I was headed downstairs, and at the noise, she stopped and turned to the bathroom. As I put my foot out to take a step down, I heard the landing behind me creak and groan, as though weight was being put on it, heavier than mine, and painfully slow. I felt an agonizing sense of dread that somebody was towering over me in my small hallway. But I chose to ignore it, and just went down the stairs with my girly, eagerly racing heart. I rationalized it's an older home, and it croaks and groans, but I still called my boyfriend and explained what happened on my way to work. He has seen and felt things here too, and I think that's why he doesn't stay the night much anymore at all. I know it's because I started doing renovations to the house. I'm trying to return it to the glorious old house it once was, with very minimal modern flair. The electricians used the crawl space in my closet to install the fixture above my stairwell, and I believe that it woke something up. Something that's much more interested in me than I am in it. I have read countless stories about other people's experiences with sleep paralysis and thought I would share my scariest ones. Everyone has heard of the shadow people. I've had an unknown black force pin me down in bed, suffocating me. However, the other two instances I've had are more bizarre, and I still think about it quite often. About 4 years ago, I was 24 years old. I still lived with my mom since I was in my second year of nursing school, and it was just easier to live at home while going to school. For context, I'm a female. Going to bed one night, all seemed well until I woke up for no reason. I couldn't move or talk. I heard almost static mumbling sounds on my left. Scared, I listen as I try to desperately move. Slowly, the static starts to get clearer and more clear, and I hear young voices, children voices. They begin chanting, "You're going to die," and giggling each time they chant. It was like they were singing a nursery rhyme. They chanted the same thing over and over again. My heart was pounding out of my chest. Logically in my head, I was telling myself this wasn't real. For those aren't religious, this may not seem like it makes sense, but I decided to pray to God in my head to make it stop. It was like I was screaming at it in my head because I couldn't physically speak. It felt like an eternity before it went away, and I was able to move. I was so scared that I couldn't move, even though I was physically able to. I rushed out of my room to my mom and told her everything. I didn't go back into my room that night. She looked at me with disbelief. I don't know if she truly believed me or understands sleep paralysis. Regardless, it's something I will never forget. My second story was around the same year. When sleep paralysis becomes a reoccurring theme every night, or every other night, I just started to sleep with the lights on. For added comfort, my cats would sleep on my bed and cuddle with me until I fell asleep. For a while, no instances of sleep paralysis had occurred, so I just assumed this was what I needed to do each night. Like usual, I went to bed with the lights on, and one of my cats, Salem, curled up on my arm while I slept. I woke up with a feeling that's all too familiar. I couldn't believe what was happening. I felt like I was being watched. To my horror, I can't make this up if I wanted to, disturbingly saw a white figure on the right side of my bed, standing very close to me. My heart felt like it dropped into my stomach. I see piercing, bright blue eyes staring back at me, and as I stared more, this white figure looked like it was a member of the KKK, with a white cloak, and the only thing I was able to see was its eyes. As I was staring at this figure in my lighted up room, I was able to glance down at my cat, seemingly unaware of the figure and sleeping soundly. This eased me up a bit. Seeing this made me remind myself that this wasn't real. After a few moments, the figure disappeared. Even with the lights on, I wasn't safe. I don't experience sleep paralysis as much as I used to, thankfully, but those are some instances where I'll never forget. This happened back to me and my cousin, who I'll call Blake for this story, back in the fall of 2009. Our grandmother decided to let us stay the night over at her house, as she often did, because me and my cousin were really close, and she was the only relative that let us stay the night at her house. Now, her house was always creepy to us, and we always said that to our papa, who passed away about 6 years before this, was still in the house watching over us. Looking back, it really didn't make sense, but it helped us sleep at night. Anyway, that night, after rounds of junk food and Call of Duty, we decided that it was time for bed. Now, one thing we always did at my grandmother's house was sleep with the TV on. That will be relevant in a minute. As we lay in our beds, we heard a loud thud come from downstairs. My eyes shot open and looked towards the door. Now, the TV wasn't super quiet, but it wasn't super loud either. Not to mention, we were on the second floor of the house, so the fact that I had heard a big thud was worrying to me. I turned over and shook Blake to see if he was still awake. Turns out he had been awake for longer than me because he couldn't sleep, so he had heard the thud too. "What was that?" I asked. "I have no idea. You think we should check it out?" He had asked me. "Yeah, we need to make sure Mama is okay," I said. That was the one mistake that possibly led to what happened afterwards. We both got up and slowly approached the door. I turned the knob and opened the door. We stepped outside onto the landing. I started to turn and walk down the stairs when Blake stopped me. I turned and he seemed like he was listening for something. Then another loud thud came from downstairs. So, being the idiots we were, we didn't think about it being an intruder, so we thought it was a ghost. I was really into ghost hunters and shows like that at the time, so I pulled out my sister's old Razor flip phone and started to record us asking questions. "Is there someone here with us?" I asked. No response. "Papa, is that you?" Blake asked. Just then, a huge crash could be heard, like something made out of glass had hit the floor. We scrambled into the bedroom. Once we were both inside, I slammed the door shut. I breathed a sigh of relief until I heard what sounded like somebody going to the drawer on the nightstand. I turned and looked at Blake. He was paralyzed, staring towards his side of the bed. The nightstand drawer was open. Again, following what I had done before, I pulled up the thermal filter on the camera of my phone. What I saw turned my blood to ice. A shadowy humanoid figure was bent over and was digging through the drawer. My cousin had snapped out of his trance and looked over at the phone. He gasped. Then the thing jerked its head to look at us. It knew it was caught. It then stood up straight and then turned to face us. I was about ready to poop myself at this point, and I just knew this thing was going to kill us both, and nobody would know what had happened. But then something weird happened. It disappeared, almost like it was blinked out of existence. I wasted no time. I tore open the door and practically flew down the stairs. I ran into the spare bedroom downstairs and turned to see if Blake followed me. Thankfully, he wasn't too far behind. Once we were both inside, I slammed the door and locked it. "What was that thing?" Blake had asked me. "I don't know, but I'm not going to sleep. I don't want that thing to sneak up on us." And we didn't. We stayed up watching these old sitcoms that networks would play in the early morning until we saw sunlight peeking through the blinds in the room. We both then passed out. When we woke up, our grandmother had asked us what we were doing last night because all she heard was banging all night long. Both of our faces drained of color. We didn't want to tell her what we saw, so we just said we couldn't sleep and stayed up most of the night. I wish that was the end, but one more terrifying event would unfold. We got my phone to go back and check the recording we had. You could hear me ask my question, and we heard no response. But when Blake asked his question, he got an answer. About 5 seconds after he asked if our papa was there with us, he heard a harsh whisper say, "Yes." A few weeks later, my sister and our cousin Lee were sleeping upstairs in the dead of night, when all of a sudden, she was awoken by what sounded like a deck of cards being shuffled, but somehow
she managed to fall back asleep. Not even an hour later, Lee was awoken by a blood-curdling scream coming from the corner of the room. She then woke my sister up, and they ran downstairs to sleep on the couch. She said it like came from a woman, then reluctantly told her what me and Blake encountered a couple years before. She looked at me in shock. That was the last creepy thing to ever happen to us in that house, because as life went on, we started going to her house a lot less and less. It got to the point where all of us had forgotten about all these things that had happened. I brought it up a few years later, and it still sent shivers down my cousin's spine. A new family bought the house after my grandma passed away just a couple of years ago, so I only pray that whatever is in that house is gone now. I found out a few years later that what we saw was a shadow person. I don't know why it was at that house or what it was looking for, but it sends shivers down my spine to know that whatever was up there could have been watching us while we slept. I am no stranger to sleep paralysis. I have suffered it from childhood. I will be the first to admit that I did not understand it. I honestly believe during that time I was somewhere between life and death. Trying to explain it to my parents, who equally did not understand it, I was afraid to talk about it after the initial talk with my parents, as I did not want to appear crazy. It was not until I went to school to be an RN that I understood it. Yet, I will also admit, I never saw anything. Not demons, not shadow people, not even lucid dreaming. It just became a part of my life I accepted. Until now. I have many families scattered throughout the States as well as Ireland. I travel between the two. Last night, however, something changed. I flew from County Kerry, spent a couple of nights in New York City before traveling to a small town in Missouri to visit a beloved uncle. He is single and owns a huge house that sits on Lake Table Rock. When I say huge, I mean huge. Several bedrooms that each hold a bath as well as a separate bathroom. It should be turned into a bed and breakfast. He gave me the choice of rooms, and I chose one overlooking the lake as opposed to one overlooking the gardens, as it is currently wintertime. My uncle, who owns this little 4.5 kilogram dog that yaps at its own shadow. For reference, I'm not a pet person. I own a dog that I love, yet I tolerate other people's pets. So naturally, for the most part, ignore this tiny dog. I tucked into bed, wondering if I could acclimate to the time change. I promise I closed the door to my room. I woke up to this tiny dog in my chest, yapping. Come on, a tiny dog yaps, not barks, and looking at the door. I realized I was in sleep paralysis. My first thought was not what the dog may have been yapping at, just that he was. My second thought was, I closed my door. How did he get in? I was able to turn my head towards the door. Anyone who has suffered sleep paralysis knows what a feat is, yet I still could not turn my body. Then I saw it, him, whatever, the shadow man. He took up the entire door frame. Was my first or second reaction fear? No. I was still wondering why the door was open. I thought to myself, alright, I am obviously in sleep paralysis. Usually when this happens, I just tell myself there's nothing else to do but go back to sleep. Or I can try and figure this out. So I looked at him. He was nothing but shadow, yet I had the feeling I was looking in his eyes as he was looking in mine. All the time this dog was yapping. I got the feeling he wanted to cause terror and fear in me. Yet as we looked at each other, I was curious about him. I felt his malice change to one of curiosity himself. He did not understand why I was not afraid. He was just as curious about me as I was him. All at once, the hall light went on. He disappeared. I heard my uncle say to his dog, "Stop barking at." The dog left me at this point and went with my uncle. I was released from the paralysis and walked over to my door and locked it. You may wonder how I could do this so nonchalantly and wrap myself in my blankets and fall right back to sleep. I can only say it was my rational and analytical mind. Surely such things do not happen, right? The next morning, my uncle made a delicious breakfast. See why I said this house should be a bed and breakfast. I was not getting to talk about the night's events before, until my uncle said, "You saw the Shadow Man, did you not?" for the first time. I was at a loss for words. At night, while in the process of going to sleep or waking up from sleep, I have experienced, and will presumably continue to experience the phenomenon known as sleep paralysis, paired with appearances from what I've come to know as shadow people. This is not a fictionalized creepypasta, nor any kind of bait and switch, me and my buddies saw this thing in the woods type of writing. I certify that everything in this writing is true in the sense that I've personally experienced it. This is not intended to be in any way funny. I am dead serious. I think that reading this may be disturbing for some, so please note that this is a warning. Let me start by noting that I am in no way superstitious and have a strictly scientific worldview. I don't believe in any kind of supernatural, ghosts, gods, angels, demons, the paranormal, or cryptozoology, or anything that would lead me to a supernatural explanation for these things. My current dominant hypothesis is that my brain, being the incredibly complex machine that it is, functions somewhat poorly during the shutdown wake-up cycles and creates these things for me to experience, and that they are only hallucinations. When I speak of the shadow people as they, or him, or her, what I really mean is the human-shaped hallucination that my brain created for me. Also, I am not sure if this is related or not, but I occasionally experience absence seizures. When this happens, I begin to feel extremely lightheaded, then overheated and nauseated, and then I see stars near the edges of my vision. Then the stars close in and fill my vision. I collapse. I become non-lucid and non-responsive, and I can only hear the environment around me in distorted frequencies. This usually only goes on for a few minutes, though it is hard to tell me while I'm like this. It happens about 2 to 3 times per year and can be triggered by perceived mental stressors. This started when I hit puberty and is still ongoing. In the most plain of terms, something about my brain is messed up and has serious malfunctions at times. I am aware of it though. You might think me less sane after reading this though. The occurrences of sleep paralysis and shadow people, hallucinations, started when I was in my early 20s and I was in college, probably around 2007. I was living in an apartment with a roommate, and when I wasn't getting dead drunk, I would routinely stay up for extended periods, 30 plus hours or more, to get my class assignments done on time. The repeat alcohol ingestion and sleep deprivation, in hindsight, represent risk factors that I now believe trigger these. Based on my own experiences, other risk factors for me include use of any kind of stimulants or depressants, or psychotropic drugs, high stress levels, and emotional and psychological instability. On one typical evening, I was in the process of waking up from a midday nap in the apartment. I had abused caffeine and sugar to push myself to finish a class assignment overnight, and naturally needed to catch up on lost sleep. I had fallen asleep on my bed in my street clothes. It was the kind of sleep that one gets after staying up for way too long. The best kind. I was lying on my back and beginning to drift towards consciousness, but wasn't fully awake yet. An in-between state. In this half-dreaming, half-awake state, I suddenly began to experience 2 very new things. A feeling of intense, icy fear, and the feeling of a presence being in the room with me with malicious intent. As I looked toward the end of my bed, I saw a shadowy figure standing silently at the opposite side of the room. Judging from its form, it appeared to be a young adult male. The strangest thing about the figure was that it had no discernible features, instead of just being an icy black silhouette with poorly defined edges, almost like more of a shadow than a physical object in and of itself. The figure then moved toward the foot of my bed, stopped, and simply stared at me, all the while projecting an extremely threatening presence through its body language. As this was happening, I felt that I needed to move to a sitting position and to tell this person to get the hell out of my room and leave my apartment. But strangely, found that I could not. I couldn't move, speak, or do anything except move my eyes to follow the movement of the figure, and was forced to lay completely still in a state of intense, paralyzing fear. The situation became extremely personally invasive and upsetting as the figure had moved slowly from the end of my bed to a position directly beside me, standing over me, well inside of my personal space. I was still unable to do anything about it but breathe heavily and sweat. In that moment, I wanted absolutely nothing but for the figure to go away and leave me alone. I jolted awake in an instant, gasping for air, convinced that there was somebody in the room with me, so I took out my pocket knife. I always have one in my pocket in my street clothes, waved it around in the near darkness, and screamed at the perceived intruder to tell them to get out of my room, and stumbled to the light switch. After turning on the lights, there was no sign of the mysterious figure. I repeatedly searched the small apartment for any sign of entry or disturbance. I found no sign of my roommate, and no sign of any intruder either. Being a skeptic, I also immediately began questioning the reality of the experience and my perceptions. Had it been a nightmare? I hadn't felt like a nightmare, yet I obviously hadn't been fully awake either. It had felt more like a mixed reality, as though between waking and dream states. Clearly, this was something new and different. Waking up from this experience and mentally processing this was disorientating and upsetting, to say the least. I went to the bathroom, splashed some cold water on my face, and talked aloud to myself to mentally reinforce what I was doing, and fully regained my orientation and sense of reality. Later, after my roommate got home, I asked him why the hell he had been in my room while I was trying to sleep, and why he had just stood over my bed like that. I told him that he had seriously scared the hell out of me, and asked him not to do anything like that ever again. He said he didn't know what I was talking about, and that he wasn't home at the time. I said that I must have had a real serious nightmare, and went on about my business for the day. At this point, I thought that I might be going insane. I had never seen anything in my life that would not easily be explained by my existing scientific worldview, but simultaneously could not explain the bizarre and upsetting experience that I had just had. In my mind, I very quickly searched for any and all existing references to anything that could explain what I had just seen, no matter how ridiculous, and assembled a number of competing hypotheses: hallucination, nightmare, mental malfunction, someone drugged me, someone broke into the apartment while I was asleep, ghosts, demons, alien abduction, interdimensional beings, out-of-body experiences, and the list went on from there. I did a Google search, which actually turned up a wealth of information. In relative terms, as the internet as a whole was not as well developed in 2007 as it is today, from those who had similar experiences. I found references to callers on Coast to Coast AM reporting seeing shadow men while in transitionary sleeping to waking states, and the appearances being paired with the feelings of intense fear and inability to move. The phenomenon is called sleep paralysis and is very well documented. Though the initial experiences were severely disquieting, and I cannot emphasize this enough, I felt better having a reasonable explanation for it. In my opinion, what makes this so upsetting for so many people around the world is that it is a variation on the classic human fear of home invasion, and the imagery lends itself to supernatural explanations. After this first experience during young adulthood, I would have many more over the years of my life, continuing into adulthood. The nature of shadow people is ever-changing. They were always threatening at first, like the first experience that I had in the college apartment, until I fully accepted that I would be visited by them during the night at random times. They seemed to want to invent new ways to surprise me. In a way, the shadow people are kind of like real people, because their own motivations and behaviors vary so wildly. They emerge from the shadows on my walls or any area of the room, though they seem to prefer my closet. I try to never sleep facing away from my closet because of this. They can look like men, women, or children of all ages, and can be single or multiple. However, they are always only black silhouettes with no distinct features. The historical majority are entirely human, but some appear to be humanoid creatures. Some wear clothing, but others do not. They may present different body language, depending on their personality. Things that the shadow people don't do include making sound and interacting with physical objects, including touching me in the room. Strangely, whenever they are present, I get the feeling that they cannot touch or otherwise directly interact with me because I know that they are not real. I have no idea what it would feel like to be touched by one of them, but I do know that I would never want to find out. The shadow people don't seem to acknowledge the concept of personal space and would just as soon stand anywhere in the room as inches from my face. They usually observe me and will sometimes attempt interaction. When multiple shadow people are present, they are able to sense interact with each other. The majority of the shadow people that I experience are, for lack of a better term, telepathic. They are able to project feelings and narratives into my mind, along with forcing me to feel their presence. Thus, I am able to understand their motivations, even though they cannot speak to me, and to know when they are in my bedroom relative to me, even when I can't see them. The feelings and narratives can be anything from, I am only here to observe you, to, I don't really want or need to be here, to, I enjoy making you feel threatened. They can be curious, shy, funny, friendly, mischievous, or even unaware of me altogether. The majority are benign in the sense that they have no malicious intent. However, the telepathy can be extremely disturbing when a shadow person does have the malicious intent, as it will project feelings of terror and doom into my mind. As typical as some behaviors are of types of shadow people, some people just don't seem to follow the established rules. These are just examples of unique ones that I have experienced. One non-human creature, similar to a combination of a dog/human or a werewolf. It sat on the edge of my bed, just past my left leg, with a hostile, hunched-over body posture that animals make when they think that you're a threat. A taller, angular adult male with limbs and fingers too long, and several accompanying children. It signaled that they were the only there to briefly observe me, and that they didn't mean to disturb me. Very polite and non-hostile. Appeared from and disappeared back into my closet. It was almost like a school teacher with students on a field trip. A slender young woman in the flowing gown with arms that ended in asymmetrical claws, resembling tree branches, and a head like a combination of a dog's and a human's. She stood with the hunched posture, mostly still near the foot of my bed, but I could tell from her telepathic broadcast that she was waiting for me to look away, and that she wanted to harm me somehow. She thought of herself as some kind of huntress. During the fall of 2016, I had a new development. I began hearing loud noises while waking up, like gunshots, rumbling, metallic banging, roaring, human screams, or doors opening and slamming. Having already experienced the shadow people for something like a decade, my first thought was something along the lines of, well, it looks like these little butts are up to new tricks. Oh well, nothing new. After this happened a few times, I Googled and found exploding head syndrome, which perfectly describes what I experience and is even known to have an overlap with those who experience sleep paralysis. I don't know why it took so damn long for my brain to start thinking that it hears these things, but I'm not really surprised by it at all. As I've said above, the hallucinations during my waking-sleeping transitions are ever-changing. Then, after the development of sound, things took a turn for the weird, dark, and scary. During a fairly recent sleep paralysis incident in the winter of 2016, I was visited by what I can only describe as a shadow person in the form of a disembodied voice. I was sleeping on my left side, facing towards my bedroom window and away from my closet. The darker part of my room and my closet was over my right shoulder. As I was transitioning to wakefulness, I felt that familiar presence of a shadow person, but was surprised by the amount of hatred that it projected for me. It was very specific and personal. I sensed the presence coming closer in my bedroom, to the point of being just over my right shoulder and ear. Of course, as in all cases, I was in that state of paralysis, and thus was unable to turn to look to see the form of the shadow person. I got the feeling that this shadow person was unhappy with me, unhappy with being in my room, and wanting to physically harm me despite being unable to do so. Typical. But then, to my absolute shock, amazement, and terror, the shadow person began speaking to me. The voice was my own, but forced into a low growl, saturated with pure hate. It was extremely verbally abusive, saying things like, "If you don't think I'm real, why don't you turn over and look at me? You're a coward, a liar, and you lie to yourself about us. Why are you surprised? You didn't think that we could talk to you. You're stupid and pathetic. You think you've accepted us, but you know nothing about us." Per the usual, I jolted awake and screamed things back at the presence, which had by then vacated. I was just so shocked that a shadow person had spoken to me, and that it had done so in such an abusive way, that it was almost like going through the experience of initial exposure all over again. To say the least, this incident seriously disturbed me, and led me beginning to write what you read now. During this, I never visually saw what this speaking shadow person looked like, and I'm glad for that. Speaking shadow person being a product of my mind, if you're still in my subconscious somewhere and can read what I'm typing, go screw yourself. As I wrote the majority of all the above, problems began to develop. Thinking and writing about my history with these experiences for a few days in a row, during February of 2017, triggered the EHS and the shadow people hallucinations often, and I was woken up several times per night by them. This went on for about a week or so, and became increasingly disruptive. Then I set into motion the worst shadow person incident that I have ever experienced when I made the mistake of discussing the writing of the story with my online gaming clan on our VOIP channel. I discussed them at length, and especially in the aspect that thinking about them directly correlated with the frequency of their appearances. I then wondered aloud about why the shadow people could not touch me when they cannot affect my other senses, such as sight and sound. That very same night, I fell asleep in my bed on my stomach after getting kind of drunk. As I was beginning to wake and entered the familiar state of paralysis, I heard a series of door slamming noises and footsteps approaching my room. Even though I couldn't see, I sensed the presence of a shadow person, a young adult woman with malicious intent. She entered the bedroom, and to my horror, surprise approached the bed and climbed on top of my back in an unwelcome and uncomfortable way. I was shocked to feel a sensation of her knees resting on my shoulder blades and her weight pressing down on me. Her skin felt like human skin. I'm not sure what I would have expected, and still not sure what to make of this. Bending down over me, she whispered taunting things into my ear from behind me and repeatedly laughed at me. She said things like, "I am here. We are all still here. Your mind is not your own. You are ours to torment." Her laughter wasn't jovial or friendly at all, but icy. After waking up from this disturbing experience, it was at that point that I realized that I was uncomfortable continuing to write about this aspect of my history, because thinking about it so much was actively causing more intense and disturbing hallucinations with malicious tones. So I stopped. I think it took about a month for me to revisit and complete this. This brings us to the present time. I haven't really seen many shadow people since the incident with the last speaking, touching woman, and certainly none as unique as her or other malicious speaking hallucinations. I now believe that thinking about these additional abilities of speech and touch may have in turn given my brain the idea to include those abilities in the hallucinations. I've been up for about 4 hours longer than I should have writing this through the night. I'm going to take a nap before work, and I'll sure as hell sleep on my back. When I was little, I used to see shadow people. I used to sleep in my mom's bedroom as a child, and obviously, I went to bed before the rest of my family because I was so young. On one particular night, my parents tucked me into bed and left a light on for me, and left the door open so that I wouldn't get scared. When they left, I saw what looked like a bunch of human shadows by the TV. I looked at them for a little while and they seemed to be moving, like they were walking on a city street. Being 6 years old, I got scared and hid under my covers and quickly went to sleep after that. I don't remember seeing them again in my mom's bedroom, but I do remember seeing them just out of the corner of my eye. I told my parents and they just thought it was just my imagination or my mind playing tricks on me. I'm still adamant to this day that I saw shadow people and even individuals who would stay in my room for a little while, as if they were watching me and then leave. I don't see them anymore and I don't know if I'll ever see them again. August 24th, 2019. It's been almost 3 weeks since my father received his cancer diagnosis. It's a bright sunny Saturday morning and there's plenty to do around the house. So I put my earbuds on, selected a playlist from my iPhone, picked up the weed trimmer and walked to the far corner of our 3rd-acre lot. It's your typical new suburban home in Central Florida. Lightly painted stucco walls with 2 to 3 understory trees and St. Augustine grass lawn. The mission for the day is to clear about 2 feet off the property line of any St. Augustine grass to continue planting hedges. I'm trimming away when, all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see a black spot, almost like a black sheet that someone has hung to dry off the side of the house. The flickering black is so deep that you can almost see green, purple, blue hues. As quickly as it came, it disappeared. This happened multiple times all throughout the morning. In total, I must have seen this spot 4 to 5 times. What has started out as a larger black flickering sheet would turn out more refined every time I saw it, always out of the corner of my eye. Last I saw it for the day, it would have been around noon, and by then a more slender, human-like figure was present from the shoulders up, with sort of a foggy, undefined bottom. Not being a big believer and almost an atheist, I convinced myself that it was stress or too much brightness outside and went on about my day as if nothing had happened. August 25th, 2019. I visit my parents' house. They live about 5 miles down the road from us. They had moved into their new home only a couple of months prior. Spent most of the day just hanging out. I'm driving back home, thinking of all the things I must do at work Monday morning. I'm driving, but I'm a bit unfocused, kind of daydreaming, numb from all the things our family is going through, and worried how the next couple of months will turn out with my dad's disease. Come to the one and only stop sign between our places. Brake, look left, look right, hit the gas. Out of thin air, a shadow appears right in front of the car. I didn't quite see it fully. The reflex was to immediately hit the brakes again, mid-intersection. Just as it came, it was gone. This time, I shared with what I saw with my partner, only to receive a call from my mom a few hours later. Dad is not doing well, and he's being rushed to the hospital. August 26, 2019. Dad unexpectedly passes. I said his death was unexpected because, even with a cancer diagnosis, he was doing quite well. He had just started his treatment, and for the first time since his 3-week-old diagnosis, we thought we would have him around for another year or so. What exactly did I see? Why at my house and not at theirs? Granted, my parents had lived with us from December to May while their home was being built. In the midst of all the grief, I started to look for answers as to what I experienced. Seems to be some form of shadow people. I believe they came to warn or to guide him to the afterlife. Anyway, just wanted to share my experience and see if anyone else has similar ones. I'll preface this by saying that my wife is 100% a skeptic. She is a very rational, scientific person and chooses to believe in what is proven and what she can quantify. But I will say, I think that's in part because she doesn't like being scared. She doesn't like scary movies and she dismisses the idea of ghosts or other cryptids. That being said, a few weeks ago, she woke me up at 3 a.m. saying that she 100% saw someone in our house, that our animals were spooked, and she asked me to search the house. I got my gun from my nightstand and searched the house and checked the doors and windows, and finding no one to return to bed where we discussed what she saw. She says that she woke up and saw the figure of a man walking out of her bedroom door. She even heard the floorboards creak as it walked out. But all of our animals were either on the bed with us or sleeping next to it. Since then, she's seen it almost every night, either leaning into the doorway with a hand on the door frame, or fully in the room, standing at the foot of the bed. She attempts to rationalize it, and eventually falls back asleep, which I hear is common with these kinds of scenarios. The worst one was a few nights ago, where she had a terrible dream where I left for work, and she felt the creature get into bed with her and put its arm over her as though it was attempting to cuddle. Even skeptics have their limits, and she doesn't want to talk about it because it's frightening her, and it's not something she could just rationalize anymore. Is there anything I can do to help put her mind at ease? From everything I've read, they very rarely cause any kind of physical harm, but I'm worried that this might do her mentally. We have a 10-month-old son, and she works nights, so her on and off days she's forced to maintain normal day hours and has trouble sleeping through the night because she's normally awake then. I've always felt I've had this sight since a child. There is a room in my grandmother's house called the Red Eye Room. Apparently, my family has been calling it that for years because a being with red eyes will climb on top of you while sleeping and stare at you. I had this happen and felt and saw the bed sag from the weight, and all I could do was scream. Fast forward to now, I'm 25. I woke up out of a dead sleep, and I see red eyes reaching towards me with a beaming smile, and before he reaches me, I scream, and he evaporates. I ran out of my house. I believe he may be in my closet, as funny as that sounds, but I see my hangers move sometimes, and nothing could be disturbing them but an outside force. Not sure if it's menacing, but it's never spoken to me or made a noise. Just watched me. I guess I don't remember exactly when I started seeing a tall, skinny black figure, but it has been happening on and off for years now. I didn't know it was abnormal. I went to a meditation retreat 2 years ago, and on the 4th day, I was terrified to close my eyes because whenever I did, multiple black figures with yellow glowing eyes would propel themselves towards me, and I would open my eyes right before they reached my face. I couldn't sleep at night because I was terrified they would come, and they did when the lights were off, even with my eyes open. During the meditation sessions, I would just sit there with my eyes open and silently cry, safely in a room full of 80 other people. I was scared for my life within my own mind, but also transferring to the physical. I was scared, confused, and terrified. I requested to talk to the leader or whatever, because we could ask questions for 5 minutes. I told him about it, and he said that all I needed to do was to keep my eyes shut while they came at me and let it happen. Face them, let them take over, and accept them. I went back and did that, and I had to force myself to squeeze my eyes tight and to not open them. It was absolutely terrifying, but they did not come back for the rest of the retreat, and I was able to sleep and meditate. I started seeing a tall figure again this winter. It appears out of the corner of my eye, and when I look, it slides away. When it happens during the day, I am scared but feel safer. But when it happens at night, I'm terrified. I either sit as still as I can or hold my breath and run to my room. The place I live has a lot of sharp corners going into different rooms, so that makes it way worse than even running away.